Welcome back, everyone. Thanks for joining us again. We have some really timely questions today because the coronavirus is kind of on everybody's mind. So one of the things I wanted to know was, how do we not sit in fear and just get paralyzed or down some very scary rabbit holes?
I think it's really hard because I think almost the level of fear and concern is a little unprecedented right now. And so I think everybody's trying to figure out what that means, right? And I think people are trying to, I think folks that are getting pretty anxious about this are trying to dig down into what's happening and how do I understand what's happening and what do I do with this, and almost like an investigative approach, like what are they saying now and what are they saying now. And I think that no matter what we're investigating on that level or what we're looking at on that level, fear is going to intensify because we're looking at it each day, and anything we look at that seems pretty concerning is going to increase each day. And so I think sometimes what's most useful when we have that fear coming up and we're feeling really intense about it, such as this with the coronavirus, is it's looking at what can you do, what do you have power over, and what you don't have power over. I think that's the essence of the message, is what do you have power over in this and what don't you? And so right now we've been given information by the CDC and by other entities, regarding healthcare issues, that we need to be washing our hands more, we need to be sterilizing often touched surfaces more, etc. And so we hear all these things, and I'm certainly not professional telling you every single thing you need to do, but it's deciding upon what's the most prudent action, taking those prudent actions wherever you set them to be, right? And then making them just as a matter of habit for yourself, and trying to engage in that habit, but not continuing to investigate, right? There's this attraction to, oh my gosh, now there's this many cases. And sometimes the news, in the way that they're portraying the information, they're saying one day that, this many people, let's say just 1,000 people in Iran have this, have coronavirus right now. And then the next day they're like, oh my gosh, there's 1,300 people with it. And then, the next day they're saying, oh my gosh, there's 1,600 people with it. And you start to notice, like, okay, so we're really just saying it's Monday. And now it's Tuesday. Right? Like,
we
the
knew that this was
progression of
growing.
the disease is not different. This is not necessarily indicating that it's getting worse, right? Like, this is what the progression of this is. And so, like, it's really easy to get tied into that and start thinking, oh my gosh, what happens if I X, or what happens if it X, right? And so we get nervous.
It seems like almost disconnecting from some of the screens where you have the 24-hour news cycle could be helpful too.
Yeah, I think it's wise to stay tuned to the issue, but that doesn't mean read 7 different articles each day and what do they each say. It doesn't mean getting into the sensationalized portion of this, where people are going into, what is it like for this one person in Wuhan today, what does it look like, right? So then the person that might struggle a bit with anxiety or any kind of anxiety prone behavior also tend to be pretty compassionate people too. And so you hear that and you're like, oh my god, if I was there,
so bad,
right? And you're losing energy. You're losing energy to all these things. Figure out what the actions are that you have to take. Take those actions, and then don't keep engaging the news. Take a break from it, right? Maybe, depending on your constitution for these things, maybe you check, the news once a day and that's the thing and that's it, right? Or maybe you do it once a week, right? And I think that that's fair. I think that if you never read the news at all, then maybe it's, worth tuning into the CDC to see what they're saying and what the suggestions are, right? So I think that's fair, but over tuning in, right? The person who's like, okay, I'll just do it once a day, and then they do it that one time that day, and then they find themselves at the bottom of 7 articles.
Right. I did it once, but I spent 3 hours doing it once.
Yes. And so if that's the protocol for you, then maybe it's trying to see if you can't push that out to every 4th day or something like that. Because if you're going to go down that rabbit hole when it happens, it's just check it out. But we don't gain anything from that process. There's something we call worry as a method of prevention, right? There's a lot of folks that will subscribe to worrying as the method that prevents the atrocity from happening. Worry isn't going to prevent any of this. So it's worth looking at, like, do you think that if you just read that one last article, you might find out that extra thing that would keep this away from you, right? Whatever this is going to turn into, it's going to turn into, and obviously we can use methods of prevention to reduce that, and so that's what we do. But worrying about this isn't going to stop anything from happening, and so putting it down. In fact, worrying increases problems because it makes us tense. It makes us thinking about it all the time, and we're losing energy to it. That energy we might need right now. Right. Keep our immune systems running.
Yeah. Keep your family happy. So checking in with like where we spend our energy. I'm sure that in some cases that sort of worry is manifesting for some people into symptoms that almost feel like OCD about I have to do this, I have to wash my hands, and it has to be 30 seconds, like whatever that is. Are you seeing a rise in that? Is there something that people should be aware of? Can you develop OCD just by like being nervous about something?
It's interesting. Like I found it interesting myself, just noticing like, okay, I'm going to take these measures, right? I'm going to, wash my hands, in between sessions, or I'm going to do this. And I'm not going to lie, it does increase our awareness. And when we increase our awareness on anything, right, it's a change, right? And so our system doesn't, it's like, okay, we're not doing this anymore. We're now, like I wash my hands typically, 3 times a day, let's say. And now all of a sudden I'm washing my hands like 7 or 8 times a day or whatever. Your system's kind of like, well, is that enough? Right? If we've made a change, now awareness is in the air of how much should we wash our hands? And so when it was what it was before, it had this kind of structure around it that was so institutionalized in your own system that you didn't question it, right? But now you do something new and it's not institutionalized, and so all sorts of questions can come up around it. Right. Well, how much is healthy? How many times do you have to wash your hands before you have OCD? Right. How many times, and so...
Am I killing my good bacteria? Yeah, what?
Right, and then we're like, oh my gosh, well, you have to wash your hands after you've touched these things. Right? And it's like, well, but then I touched that thing, and then I touched that thing. And it's really easy, I think, for somebody with any kind of anxiety for this to kind of move in that direction. It doesn't mean that people are going to develop OCD out of nowhere, like, the actual disorder. But is it going to make people a bit more obsessive, maybe a little more compulsive? I think it can. And so it's just trying to remember to keep it in good measure. And so I can't say how many times a day that would be for any one person, but it's like if you're starting to feel like you're thinking about every surface you've touched, and it's trying to keep it in, I'm doing what I can, I'm doing the best I can, without thinking like, well, now I actually do have to go ahead and wash my hands because I touched this doorknob and I don't know if I fully sterilized that doorknob, and then I touched my phone, and did I touch my face in between? When we get there, again, we're losing energy. Right? And so it's deciding like, okay, at these intervals it makes sense to wash my hands, right? And it's not just about washing hands, it's about washing surfaces and where will I go? Can I go out? How big a number of people can be there, right? It's looking at any of those in this respect and thinking like, okay, I'm going to do my very best with this, I'm doing my best with this, but I'm not overshooting. Right? I'm not getting into the place where I can't even think straight because I'm trying to process every possible surface I might have touched, right? Yeah. It's, and I can't say where that line exists for any one person, but when I started, I'll tell you, when I started increasing washing my hands, I was like, oh, this is interesting. This is a little, this is unwieldy, right? Like I could be like, oh, I did touch that door, and then I noticed, like when when I was doing certain things, I noticed, oh my gosh, I'm like kind of aware that I touched something that I hadn't previously sanitized, and I was carrying that energy in my hand, and I was like, this is a problem.
Yep.
All right, I'm not letting this go here, right? Like, and so this is more, not wanting to get there, recognizing what that can look like, and what a difficulty that can be. And so it was like, all right, listen, I'm washing my hands.
Yep.
In between clients, that's a reasonable thing to do.
Yeah.
Right? Just not spreading germs, and then I go home at the end of the day. Whatever germs are probably in my house or in my
They're
house.
still in my house.
But that's just my take. I don't want to say, like CDC might come out with something different, about how often certain things should happen. But it's more about trying to remember to engage a reasonable part of your brain. That, like, if I go down this rabbit hole,
right,
I'm not going to be able to do anything. I'm not going to be able to, there's a point where, if you keep engaging it on that level, it would be very, very problematic.
It sounds like it almost comes back to some healthy habits about just mindfulness in general, and maybe even meditation, and just like figuring out how to center yourself and let things go that are outside of your control.
Right. A lot of this is outside our control, right?
Yeah.
And, it's very easy for somebody in an anxious state or an OCD state to kind of get into that argument of, well, you can control this and you can control that. It just keeps going down that pathway.
Right.
And it's just, I think the best way I could describe it is to keep it between, a certain level of vigilance right now.
Yeah.
And a place of how much energy am I putting towards this? And then, where's the cost benefit analysis? If I'm exhausted from doing all these things, I'm not even working and all of that because I've let this get so out of hand, then you're running your immune system down. It's like, it's just saying, it's trying to say to yourself, is this reasonable? Is this reasonable?
That makes sense.
Right.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
And we will see you guys next time. Thanks so much. And if you have any specific questions, feel free to let us know in the comments below.